Hello and welcome to Factually. I'm Adam Conover. Thank you so much for joining me on the show again. This week, we're talking about one of my favorite topics, games. I am a gamer. I love games of all types, but especially I love video games. I grew up obsessed with them. And like with so many adolescent romances, my parents did not approve. They thought that Super Nintendo was going to lead me to ruin, okay? And when the Nintendo 64 came out, I was forced to borrow money from a friend and pay him back over months just to get these games that my parents were certain would harm me and rot my brain. And you know, today, as an adult, I'm happy to report that my parents were wrong and I was right. Suck it, Mom! I know you listen to the show, okay? Because now we know without a doubt that games actually are important. You know, a couple years ago, we had on the show the philosopher C.T. Nguyen, and he explained compellingly that games are their own art form, an art form that deals specifically with agency. Like, imagine three different games. In one, you're a general commanding troops. In another, you're a knight on a magic quest. And in a third, you're a rich guy with a sick obsession for building the craziest roller coasters imaginable. Consequences be damned. That is a real game. In each of these games, you're acting out a different role. Each game has a different idea of how agency in a specific sphere works and what it means. That makes games distinct as an art form from films or novels or other art forms because it is the only one that contains the agency of the person experiencing the artwork as something to be played with. And that makes games valuable as an art form. They are not trivial. They contain information about us. They encode our values and our preconceptions. And that's why we have been playing them as a species since the dawn of humanity. So, what kind of roles have games played in human history, and what do they tell us about people and society today? Well, we are going to get into all of that on today's episode. But before we do, I just want to remind you that if you want to support this show and all the conversations we bring you, you can do so on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/Adam Conover. $5 a month gets you every episode of the show ad-free, and you can join our awesome online community, which is full of people who love talking about games and other interesting things. And of course, if you want to come see me do stand-up on the road, head to adamconover.net for my tickets and tour dates. Coming up soon, I'm headed to Phoenix, Arizona, Toronto, Canada. A bunch of other dates are going to hit my calendar very soon, so check that out at adamconover.net. Now, to talk about games and our evolving relationship to them, our guest today is Kelly Clancy. She is a bioscientist and a neurophysicist, as well as a journalist, and her fascinating new book is called Playing with Reality: How Games Have Shaped Our World. Please welcome Kelly Clancy. Kelly, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's talk about games, my favorite topic. How basic are games to humanity as a human activity?
It turns out they go back real far. Actually, beyond humans, they're evolutionarily ancient. Like insects play, fish play, pretty much all mammals play. And
wait, tell me more about how insects play. I'm really sorry to jump in right away, but you said that, and I'm imagining what, ants kicking a ball around?
Yeah, there's been research where they gave bees a ball and they'll play around with it.
Wow.
They'll like wrestle each other for fun. Yeah. So it's kind of very simple stuff. And the same is true of animals. It's all very simple play, like playing with, like fish will play with bubbles. They'll kind of ride bubbles.
Wow.
Birds will sled. So yeah, a lot of animals play, and it's very correlated with intelligence. More intelligent animals tend to play more, and humans play a lot. And it's one of these behaviors that neuroscientists have had trouble studying because it's so fundamental that you can't really stop animals from doing it. You can suck the entire cortex off of a rat and it lives, it's fine. You can do this when it's a baby and it has a pretty normal life. But except it doesn't have a cortex, which is like the part of our brain we think of as being responsible for higher intelligence, and it will still play games. So it's this very fundamental part of our brain circuitry, and hard to study for that reason.
Play is literally hardwired into our brains to some degree. The urge to play.
That's right. The closest we've got to kind of abolishing that behavior is, it turns out rats have a kind of laughter, like a play vocalization, and they'll make this vocalization when they want to play, and when they laugh or whatever, the other rats in their area stop whatever they're doing and they all play together. But if a rat is born deaf, it can't hear those vocalizations, so it ends up playing much less than it's hearing peers.
Oh,
And so it has a kind
this
of
is breaking my heart.
Well, it's unfortunate, but it is nature. And so those rats grow up to be kind of socially awkward. They can't read their social peers' cues. They are pretty aggressive. So we think that play has this really important role in sort of socializing us.
Yeah, I just think it's so funny that you said the closest we've gotten to abolishing play, like that there are scientists out there who are going like, I am studying how to abolish play. It's too much fun. We must stamp it out. Like, I'm sorry to do a German accent. It just seems like what a horrible thing to want to study.
That's true. That I had not thought of it that way, and now I feel terrible. Luckily, I'm not doing those experiments.
Well, hopefully, these I can imagine, like, I would want to be the scientist who like figures out a new way to help the deaf rats play, right? I would think, let's come up with some nice games for the deaf rats that help them communicate.
No,
right?
in German's defense, this was a German team that
it really was a German team. Oh my God.
There's a German team currently working on rat tickling. So they tickle rats and they teach rats hide and seek.
They teach rats hide and seek.
Yeah. And like kids, like human kids cannot play hide and seek until they're 3 or 4, I think. So rats are actually pretty smart to be able to play that game. But yes, there's a German lab teaching rats hide and seek.
I was too mean to the Germans then, because that is such a wholesome, fun group of Germans who are like, yes, we want to teach the rats to play hide and seek. And the government pays me to do this. It's very nice in our country. Yeah. Let's define play, first of all, because we're talking about play. Like, if animals do it, it must be a very distinct sort of behavior. So what do we mean when we say play? And then from there, let's get to games themselves.
Yeah. So play, we could define as, it's usually kind of like a behavior undertaken of an animal's free will. It doesn't need to do it. It appears to have some kind of enjoyment in it. And it's often social in nature, but it could also be with like an object. So they're like exploring a ball or exploring some, jacks in their environment or something. And then a game is, you could think of as, it's kind of like, I would say, animals play and humans play games. Like games a little more sophisticated. It's like a system that's furnished with a goal that players can only accomplish by certain means. So for example, like golf, you need to get a ball in a hole, and you can't just like pick up the ball and walk it over to the hole and plop it in. You have to get the ball in the hole by hitting it with a funny stick and following all these particular rules.
Yeah, there's restrictions. Like in soccer, the main restriction is you can't use your hands. If you could use your hands, it wouldn't be the same game, or maybe even close to a game at all.
That's right.
And what is so I can understand sort of the social purpose of play generally as a way, I don't know, to get out aggression in a safe manner, to create social bonds, to rehearse other activities that you might want to do, that sort of thing. I mean, maybe those are my naive assumptions and you have better ones. But that seems pretty obvious. What is the purpose of a game socially? And what are the oldest games we know about?
Yeah, so the purpose of a game, in the same way that play has lots of reasons, there's multiple reasons for a game. And they're kind of a way that we explore uncertainty and explore things we don't understand in the world. So that could be through the realm of like probabilistic games like dice. So we're kind of exploring randomness in that. It could be exploring other people's minds in a game like poker, where we, have hidden information and we're trying to work out how somebody with like information we don't have makes decisions. It can be, other kinds of uncertainty. It's generally, I think, teaching us. It's kind of practice for like, what do we do when we don't know what to do? And that's also true of play. Like a lot of play for animals is like they're wrestling. They're training up for like, how do I hunt when I'm older? Or how do I wrestle like potential rivals for mates when I'm older? So a lot of it is kind of practice in a safe space for future events. And some of our oldest games, I think like potentially the oldest game boards that archaeologists have found are like up to 10,000 years old, like Mancala boards. So like it's like a pebble counting kind of race game.
I played Mancala. Yeah,
Oh, yeah?
I remember in my middle school, I think like one of the teachers had a Mancala set and taught us all how to play it. And like, it was one of those games that kids would, during lunch hour, sit around and play Mancala.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
Where you drop a stone in each little dish and try to make your way around. I forget the exact rules. It was something like that, right?
Yeah. So there's like, it seems like a lot of the older games are like kind of racing or moving pebbles around games. So like Senate is another really old one was from ancient Egypt, and it was like a racing game, and also people were using it to kind of teach players how to navigate the afterlife. So they kind of like put these instructions on top of the board game squares for like how to get past the mummification chamber, and so it was kind of like this democratization of the afterlife.
That's cool. But I have to imagine that, first of all, 10,000 years is a long time in human civilization. That's like really getting early. So this means that like games have been present for like all of human history that we know of. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, recorded history. Yeah, I would say yes. It's really hard to tell what exactly constitute a game piece in a lot of like archaeological digs, because something that looks like a game piece could be something else. There's, for example, there's a game that's played a lot today in Central Asia, which is like played with the knuckle bones of sheep, and it looks like there's evidence of people playing that game for like thousands of years. But it could also be that people have been eating sheep knuckle bones for a long time, so it can be really hard to distinguish. Yeah.
Oh man, these people really love this game. They have like a lot of knuckle bones.
Yeah, right.
No, they're just fucking hungry for sheep. Yeah. What is the game that you play with sheep knuckle bones? I'm curious.
I think it's kind of like more or less like a jacks game or like some kind of dice game. I've never played it myself, but they use it like it's as though it's a dice. And actually, so did like the ancient Greeks. A lot of cultures use this knuckle bones.
I'm just imagining like going on like the Board Game Geek website and getting into arguments on forums about like what the best brand of sheep knuckle bones is to play your sheep knuckle bone game. I'm very curious. I'd love to, if anybody listening has played the sheep knuckle bone game, please let us know in the comments. But I also have to imagine that there might have been games like before any of those discovered game boards, because like, what about like sport type games? I mean, just in terms of, I imagine games developing from just being like, hey, who can hit the rock with the pebble? Just that sort of simple competition. Add a rule or two and you have a game, right?
Totally. And yeah, it seems like sports is something that is, for the most part, not going to be in the archaeological record, but some are. Like there's some amazing, like the Mesoamerican ball game, which is like a family of games in Mesoamerica where they were like trying to keep this hard, huge rubber ball off the ground using their hips. So kind of like racquetball, except without rackets. And it was used as a proxy for war. So like all of the portraits of like kings from that era, this is like almost 4,000 years ago. All of the kings are like wearing headgear because that's how they like became legitimate, was like through this game. And then if they had any territorial disputes, instead of having a war, they would play the game, which is actually kind of brilliant. And this was also true of like, I believe like the Iroquois, like the Six Nations were often playing lacrosse instead of having wars. And that's how they kind of cohered as a collective tribe. So there's really interesting history to sports as well.
Yeah, so these are games or sports that came out of ritualized warfare. Like my understanding of ritualized warfare would be like if you have two groups of people near each other and they need to settle disputes, but they don't really want to kill each other. Like, oh, too many people have died. Let's just have like a fake little war to determine no death or maybe little death, but but I could see how that could become a game where like, hey, instead of brandishing spears, what if we brandage a basketball, right? Or whatever.
Yeah. And it's great. And it's something that you see in the animal kingdom as well. Like, for example, deer. People didn't know what antlers were for the longest time because people were like, well, why don't deer just have really sharp antlers and kill each other when like they wrestle? That would be way cooler. And then they could stab their predators, and like, why aren't deer antlers sharp? And it turns out it's because if they killed each other all the time, there wouldn't be any deer. So the wrestling with their antlers for mates is like a much more like sensible way of of having this kind of like limited war.
Yeah, and that explains like East Coast sports rivalries, right? Because like, you know, people from like New York and Boston and Philly, they hate each other. But hey, way better to, you know, have them just scream at the Celtics and the Knicks and the Red Sox and the Phillies than actually, you know, come to blows. That makes a lot of sense. Now, I think what we should do is we should turn it into ritualized warfare. And when one of those teams wins, their state enlarges and the other state shrinks. Let's have the, you know, MLB, let's have the World Series be for territory, you know?
Oh, I like that a lot. Yeah. They need to bring that back.
But we have this idea that games are trivial, right? That's what I grew up with throughout most of my life. My parents, you know, I was very interested in games and they were like, what are you doing with those things? You know, I remember telling them, oh, I'd like to be a game designer. And they were like, that's not even a job, you know? And I don't blame them for that. And it's not a field I actually think I would have been good at, but it was, you know, it was something I was interested in. And it was seen as something very trivial, not something that was worth being interested in. And so we could be having a conversation about what are the source of games, you know, where do games come from, even if it was just a trivial fun activity. But you make the argument that games are important, an important part of human society and civilization. Why is that?
Yeah. So part of why I was kind of inspired to write this book was like, I was just wondering, people have been so fascinated by games for so many thousands of years. Surely there's something interesting there. Like, why have we been playing them for so long? Why do animals play them? And there's also all of this really interesting links to like, you know, more intelligent animals play more, like animals with larger brains play more. There's this really interesting link between intelligence and games. And this is also coming true in the search for like artificial intelligence, where for 75 years, actually longer, computer scientists have been using games as the kind of substrate to grow an artificial intelligence. So like we had Deep Blue playing chess, we had AlphaGo playing Go. So games are this really interesting model of like how we make decisions. So yeah, so this has been a really deep part of human history. And I think, you know, contemplating games has actually been extremely beneficial to science as well. So for a long time, you know, people were obsessed with games for thousands of years. There's like a 4,000-year-old Hindu scripture that compares dice to a drug. In the Renaissance, the casino was born, and like the Venetian nobility almost crumbled because they all went bankrupt playing games. So like it has this huge hold on us. And in around the Renaissance, because casinos were born and now there's this like huge monetary incentive to kind of like understand randomness better, scientists were incentivized to look into this. And probability theory came out of Pascal, Blaise Pascal and Pierre Fermat looking at, you know, the mathematics of dice. And this was like extremely revolutionary because at the time people thought chance was like reflecting the whim of gods. Like clergy would like throw dice in ancient Greece to augur the will of God. And actually the word clergy comes from kleros, the Greek for chance. So there was this really deep belief that like chance is just like this unknowable thing until the Renaissance, and people started like doing the math and doing the experiments and being like, I get, you know, if I roll a 6-sided die, I get a sixth of the time or whatever. And realizing that actually there's like laws of chance and there's like order that you can ascertain. And so this was like a huge, huge win for the scientific method because it was like suddenly like the mind of God was knowable in some way. And then probability theory kind of laid the groundwork for better empiricism. It's the basis for all of economics, like expected value. We talk about like, you know, the stock market being bets, like so much of our language comes from thinking about the world as though we're all playing a game and like making decisions and like calculating our risks as though making decisions in a game.
Yeah. And one of the cool things about what you're describing is, you know, you're talking about thinkers and scholars looking at dice and saying, oh, okay, let's hold on. We can deduce probability from these, but they are sort of figuring out something that I bet the dice players already knew. Like if you're throwing dice and wagering money on it and doing that a lot and maybe making your living at it, you might not think that the roll of the dice is the subject of the whim of God. You're like, no, if I make this bet, I have a pretty good chance of coming out ahead. Like there is a knowledge that those players would receive about the world from the game that the great thinkers of the time were yet to figure out.
Yeah. And they basically just kind of externalized it. Because I think, again, at that time, it was also thought that games are really trivial. And then Pascal was a child prodigy, and his family converted to this like weird Christian sect, and he wasn't allowed to think about mathematics because it was like akin to mental masturbation. And then at some point, his like dad died, and he had this like, dissolute period, and played a lot of dice games, and started thinking about these questions. So it was really like that firsthand knowledge that got him thinking about these things. And from his kind of insights, we got this extremely profound field of mathematics. And all of these other thinkers were like, okay, yeah, games are actually huge. Like Gottfried Leibniz, the philosopher, was like, okay, I'm going to found a games academy because games are way more profound than we realized.
That is really cool. I also know that, while we're staying on the topic of mathematics, when I was in college, I took a class on game theory, which is a very important like branch of mathematics that is explicitly tied to games and studies things that are called games. And I know have had a wide application in the military, things like that. Tell me about that branch of mathematics.
Yeah. So game theory came largely out of the brain of the genius John von Neumann, who was a Hungarian physicist, mathematician, who fled Europe in the 30s because he was Jewish and was not welcome there anymore, and was unbelievably and completely rightfully devastated by what was happening in Europe. And he really wanted to understand why humans behave the way they do. Like, why would we make such irrational decisions? Or like, why do we, he wanted to kind of just understand human behavior. So he thought of it as a game, like playing a 2-player game where like only one person can win, and we're all making decisions where we're trying to like maximize our chance of winning. And so he had some nifty mathematics and came up with game theory, in part in help with Oscar Morgenstern. It's supposed to be a model of humans. And so the game theoretic agent, this like model of a human, is supposed to be purely selfish, and it's like just trying to win the game. And so they thought this was a pretty good model of humans. And then this was co-opted by the military because, with World War II happening, we got the nuclear bomb, and suddenly we had to make decisions on a much faster timescale at like a much more existential level. So like diplomacy was being kind of outstripped by our technical, development. So people thought that like game theory would be this way that we could kind of make decisions better. And so the RAND Corporation, research and development think tank, basically took game theory as this model for war. And it gave us things like MAD, mutually assured destruction. So like if we have two superpowers that have like a lot of nuclear weapons, they shouldn't strike each other, because if one strikes the other country, then the other country will completely annihilate the first. So you get this kind of like uneasy peace. So a lot of these like interesting thought experiments came out of game theory. But ultimately, it's actually a terrible model of humans, because when psychologists looked at whether humans are well described by game theoretical agents, we don't really act like that at all. We're not selfish. We're pretty honest, actually. So there's a lot of and now kind of game theory it's kind of the central foundation of a lot of economics. So it's somewhat problematic, I'd say.
Yeah, well, I mean, all of that is so fascinating. It makes me have so many thoughts, because first of all, like game theory also in a way seems to be an attempt to reduce politics or, the human social decision making to numbers, and it kind of works that way in some cases. Like, for instance, I was involved in, the writer's strike last year, and there's a lot of like, okay, if we do X, they'll do Y. When you're talking about, conflict negotiations, there's a whole lot of thinking that way, and you really need to know what the other person is going to do. But that also requires knowing who they are, what their sources of information are, what their personality is, what the political pressures are on them, how they might be feeling that day, whether they're hangry at the meeting. All those things are real, and you can't reduce them out. And yet there is a little bit of truth in the game theory. And it reminds me of when I play a video game about politics. You know, there's some wonderful ones I've played. Crusader Kings is a wonderful game about medieval politics. There's lots of games in this category where you're sort of doing diplomacy. And when the game models it correctly, you actually do learn something about how diplomacy works. You're like, oh, okay, this real issue is faced by rulers, you know, actually in the real world. And now I understand, I have a little bit of insight. Maybe I can take that to my own time. I have to be diplomatic with my boss at work or whatever. But it's a mistake to think that reduced game model is literally a model for reality. It's more of it's a model, right? It's a smaller version of it. So it's like right in one way, but wrong in another. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there are right things about game theory as well. But to kind of like over rely on it for all of our models of humanity is certainly not warranted.
But it's certainly an area in which like games themselves had a huge impact on the world. That literally thinking that came out of games, capital G games, like are influencing American policy thermonuclear war. That's like a really big fucking effect that for games to have.
Right. So, you know, and the kind of scary thing about MAD, for example, is it's not actually that rational. Like if you were to get hit, if like one country got hit by another country's nuclear war, and then their response is like, okay, I'm going to now end the entire world. Like that's not rational. So they realized pretty early on that like either they would have to have an automated system to make that kind of decision. So like we get hit and then it just like ends the world. And that's what like Dr. Strangelove is all about.
Right.
Or you have to have a like crazy person in charge of the nuclear arsenal, which Nixon was basically trying to be. Like he said it, you know, he called it madman theory, and he was trying to be as crazy as possible to sort of back up the threat that like, yes, I would end the world if you hit us. And that's actually partly what the Vietnam War was all about. It was supposed to like show that we were kind of like morally depraved as a country and that we would just do whatever to like, yeah. So the like Vietnam War was in many ways like a kind of ploy to back up the credibility of our nuclear threat. So there's some like really dark things that come out of subscribing to these, to these ideas that I think ultimately like just plain old diplomacy did a lot better on. And then, you know, in the defense of games, like this is not game theory, but then like in 1983, we were having like heightened tensions in the Cold War, and Thomas Schelling, economist, was invited to like organize a game for like a simulation game of nuclear war for top 200 American politicians and military officers. And so they all workshop through like a bunch of different nuclear war scenarios. Like what if the Soviets hit us here? What if this happened? What if it was like a limited nuclear war, blah, blah, blah. So they went through like what technological capabilities do we actually have? What do they have? Yada, yada, yada. And like pretty much every outcome of every war they could work through was like the end of the world. The best case scenario was, I think, 500 million people died, and then another 500 million people would die of radiation poisoning.
Wow.
So all of the like officials, all the politicians, all the military officers were so horrified by this game outcome that they realized like, oh shit, we can't actually do the things we think we can do. This would all be a disaster. And it actually inspired the Reagan administration to totally tone down their nuclear rhetoric and open up sweeping arms negotiations with the Soviets. So in that case, the game was pretty great.
This was a real life version of the War Games film where the computer plays tic-tac-toe a million times and says the only way to win is not to play.
So embarrassingly enough, Reagan also loved that movie. And that movie also scared the shit out of him. Yeah, it is a great movie. Yeah, he was like obsessed with it. He had it like played for his whatever at Camp David or something. And that plus the outcome of this game scared the shit out of him. And then they like turned around. So yes, that movie moved Ronald Reagan.
Oh my God. I mean, Ronald Reagan, such a harmful, destructive president in American history, in my opinion, as I've done a lot of work about. Now I'm just thinking about what are the other movies and video games that I could have had Ronald Reagan play to improve America so that he didn't, cut a million departments disastrously and, usher in an age of, jingoism and hypercapitalism. Maybe we could have had him play, I don't know, Papers, Please, and what other games that like build empathy in people?
Yeah.
What movies could he have been watching? Very funny to think about. I'm on an ongoing mission to live a healthier lifestyle. And, it's not always easy. There's some bumps along the road. I do have a milkshake every once in a while, but I try to make a little progress every day. And I'm sure you do too, right? Well, for me, that means being mindful of the big things and the small things, down to making choices to bring better quality groceries into my home. And that is why I have been such a big fan of Thrive Market for so many years. This is absolutely true. We have used Thrive Market in our house before they even started advertising on this show, because it is one of the best ways to get all of my grocery and household essentials, get them all online and shipped to my doorstep. It's a huge time saver, but not only that, they have the healthy options that I want to get in my pantry. I love that Thrive Market carries brands with the highest quality ingredients and sourcing methods. They restrict hundreds of ingredients across their food and cleaning categories, and I can use their on-site filters to pick the foods that suit my lifestyle needs. So for instance, my girlfriend is gluten-free. She has to eat gluten-free, and we are able to filter all the gluten-free pastas and pick our favorites like jovial cassava elbows. Really good for mac and cheese if you're trying to make some without all that pesky gluten in there. You can curate your shopping experience with just a few clicks, whether you're looking for sugar alternatives, low-fat foods, whatever it is, you can do it. And as a Thrive Market member, I save money on every single grocery order. On average, I save over 30% each time. They even have a deals page that changes daily and always has some of my favorite brands. And get this, when you join Thrive Market, you're also helping a family in need with their one-to-one membership matching program. You join, they give. So join in on the savings with Thrive Market today and get 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift. Go to thrivemarket.com/factually for 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift. That's THRIVE market.com/factually. thrivemarket.com/factually. Today's episode is sponsored by Delete Me, friends of the show and a service that I have personally used and trusted for years before they even started advertising with us. I've shared before on this show about the hassle of having personal information leaked online. For me, it led to annoying phone calls and solicitations, nothing too serious, but it definitely made me feel less safe and secure because, worse things could have happened. And that's because for many others, exposed personal info can lead to far more devastating situations. You might have heard about the rise of so-called pig butchering scams. They start with a seemingly innocent wrong number text, but it's no accident. Scammers use these messages to engage victims, build trust, and then recommend phony investments, often draining bank accounts in a flash. It is so awful that this is the world that we live in. But until we can easily crack down on the scammers, we need to be proactive in protecting ourselves. And that is why I use Delete Me. Delete Me's team of experts scrubs your unwanted information from the internet, reducing the risk that your phone number, address, or email ends up with a scammer. And again, I have used this myself. I know that it really works. And you might think, hey, I'm savvy. I can spot a scam a mile away, and you might be right. But can you say the same for the people you care about most? That is one of the best features. Delete Me lets you create custom data sheets to protect your loved ones, whether it's a spouse or parents who might be champing at the bit to read a stranger their bank account number if they call them on the phone. So, why take the risk? Sign up for Delete Me, and in just 7 days, you will receive a detailed report of their findings and the peace of mind that comes with knowing your information and your family's information is being looked at after by experts. You can get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/Adam and use promo code Adam at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/Adam, promo code Adam. In the last couple months, we've talked at length on this podcast about how important it is to support quality journalism at a time when access to reliable information is crumbling. That is why I am so honored and delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by the Washington Post. Since you listen to Factually, I think there's an extremely high chance that you're already a person who aims to stay informed, aware, and engaged and cares about the quality of the information you read, right? I do too. Well, one of the number one ways I stay engaged is through reading the Washington Post. The Post's amazing journalists bring me the facts and provide clarity about what's happening in the coverage areas that I and you care about most. Naturally, they give you the lowdown on what's happening on Capitol Hill, of course, but they also cover the economy, climate change, foreign policy, and culture. Plus, they have fun features like cooking and crosswords. The Washington Post has a whole world of surprising and necessary stories and actionable advice. And if you love how deep we go on topics on Factually, you are going to love going deep with the Post. And if you need any more evidence, you just got to look at the incredible roster of journalists they have working for them. Past guests on this show like Taylor Lorenz, David Weigel, Brian Merchant, all of them have contributed to the Post. And you can go right from listening to them on this show to reading their insightful writing right on the site. And you know what? If you're saying, well, I'm a podcast person, I barely have time to read. Well, guess what? The Post has audio lovers like you covered. You can actually listen to articles in addition to reading them, so you can tackle your to-do list and catch up on the news at the same time. I personally love the Post's The 7 newsletter, which is a quick commute read sent every weekday morning, and that is also available as a podcast. And get this, from May 21st to June 3rd, you can go to washingtonpost.com/factually to subscribe for just 25 cents per week for your first year. That is 90% off their typical offer, so this is truly a steal. Once again, that's washingtonpost.com/factually to subscribe for just 25 cents per week for your first year. And you know what? If you happen to listen to this ad after June 3rd, know that we still have an amazing 50 cents per week offer just for our podcast listeners. washingtonpost.com/factually. As long as we're talking about functional games, I have a question about the whole premise of functional games in a little bit. But is this something that people are still using today? The idea of, hey, let's create a game that is going to convince someone of something or teach someone something in the real world. Are there any prominent examples of that?
Yeah. So there's tons of military. The military uses games all the time for training and for games. Planning. Yeah. So Kriegsspiel came out of 19th century Germany and was hugely successful, helped Germany secure an empire, helped Hitler in the early days of his successful campaign, and then hurt him later when he fucked up planning to invade the Soviets. So there.
And what was the Kriegsspiel? What was these games? What were they?
Yeah, so Kriegsspiel came out of chess. So chess was originally came out of 6th century India. It was intended to be an abstraction of war, and a lot of people used it as training for military strategic thinking. And in the late 1700s, a mathematician, Johann Helwig, was actually chess could be even better if it was a little more realistic, if it was less abstract. So he started kind of layering realism back in. He expanded the chessboard to 1,600 squares, and other people started improving on that. So soon it was played on scaled maps of real territories, and people were kind of
sounds like a nerd. He sounds like a real Warhammer guy, in his basement, painting his minifigs.
It's exactly, and that's where Warhammer came out of it.
He's you know what would make chess better would be if there was a rifle guy and a goblin on a cart, and maybe we have a dragon in there, and it could be really big. I know that guy. I went to high school with that guy, and he's still doing that today, except now he's in his 40s. And you know what? Good for him. I wish I was playing. But sorry, go on.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally where that came from. So yeah, it got improved over time.
Those war games today literally came out of that sort of gameplay a century or two ago.
That's right. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So it became really, really useful. So two teams of military officers would kind of take turns on this little scaled map with their little lead block troops, attacking each other or invading each other or spying on each other or whatever. And there were they would had these data tables from real wars of okay, if a cannon hits here, how many casualties do we expect? And so they could really, really realistically simulate how many troops do we need? When would they need to be resupplied? So it was incredibly powerful simulation engine, and really powerful for planning attacks, because people could kind of zoom out and get a bird's eye view of what would this battle look like. So it was hugely successful. And then it eventually kind of became commercialized and turned into things like Warhammer and Dungeons and Dragons. And so, instead of troops, you have your character, and instead of the umpire deciding casualties, it's the dungeon master.
I played those games as kids, and by the way, I was teasing war gamers a little bit, but wargaming is a very, very wonderful hobby that I wish I had the attention span for to calculate all those tables. But it never occurred to me that literally came from like people working for the military going, okay, a cannon would kill this many real people. That it's a little bit chilling almost that a game used to actually simulate real deaths by people who would then go send those people into battle. Like now we play for fun. It's a little bit eerie.
Yeah. So H.G. Wells is one of the people who like popularized it. He like played Kriegerspiel. He thought it was cool. And so then he made it into like this tabletop home version where you had the little like soldier troops, and he called it Little Wars. And he was a huge pacifist, and he in the book, he keeps kind of like trying to clear his conscience and say, I'm hoping that by playing at war, people won't want to wage it. Because also at the time, democracy was kind of becoming a thing, and everyone was kind of freaking out in Europe and thinking, well, what if people just vote for war? Or like, who's going to make good decisions? So Wells was kind of trying to educate people and give them like a firsthand account of like what war looks like. And obviously that hasn't like really borne out. Like Winston Churchill played Little Wars, and lots of people play war games and then end up like getting recruited by the military.
So I cut you off a little while ago to tell us about Kriegerspiel. That's fascinating. And then what you said, it helped Hitler, then it hurt him. So good, I guess. But what happened after that in terms of the development of war games as something the military uses?
Yeah. So, the military still does these kind of exercises all the time, both for training and for planning purposes. They've made video games. The U.S. Army's made video games of like trying to be as realistic as possible. And it's actually been their like number one recruiting tool for getting young kids interested in enlisting. Like, oh, wow, I died in the video game. So this would be fun to die in real life this way. I would enjoy that. That's the idea? I guess, yeah.
Ooh, bummer. I mean, are there more positive examples of games being used to change people's minds about things or et cetera?
Yeah. So it's not just the military using these games. Lots of non-military like government departments use these things. So the year before Hurricane Katrina happened, I think FEMA had a big simulated game called Hurricane Pam, where they're like preparing for a giant hurricane hitting New Orleans. Obviously, whatever they learned from that game, they did not put into practice in time for Hurricane Katrina. But people go through these exercises, and sometimes it's more successful than other times. And then in terms of like, I think there's a lot of games coming out by commercial developers that are intended to like develop empathy. Like This War of Mine, I don't know if you played that, but it's like, I think it's taking place in maybe Sarajevo, like during a siege. And it's like a survival game, and you're playing as, people in a shelled out house trying to survive the winter. Games are really powerful for giving people a sort of firsthand experience of whatever, and I think that's something, that's just like such a powerful thing about games, because, when you think about a game versus like reading a book, when you read a book, you talk about the character, you say like Caroline did this thing and then she did this other thing. You're just kind of like reading what's happening, versus when you're playing a video game, when you're describing what's happening in the game to a friend, you say, I did this in the video game. You don't say like the character did this, like you say, I did it. So it's a very kind of intimate experience compared to just reading. And that can be really powerful for people.
Yeah. I had on the show a couple years ago, the philosopher C.T. Nguyen. Are you familiar with his work? He was really wonderful guest, and he has a wonderful theory about games as an art form, that it's what they play with is agency as art, that the ability to do some things and not others. So you play Mario and you have this athletic agency, and you can experience what it's like to have the sort of athleticism Mario does. And that is the feeling, that agency is what the designer is playing with in an artistic way, versus a game that's playing with the idea of, your agency is as a diplomat, or your agency is whatever. And I think that's such a cool frame of analysis. Maybe it doesn't explain every game under the sun, but it explains so much of what I like in games, that it gives me the feeling of not just being another person, but being another way of being in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I love his work and I love that idea. And, in my neuroscience work, I was actually, I was not thinking about games at the time, but I was also studying agency and like sort of how do we learn to do new things? I made brain machine interfaces. And the kind of amazing thing about that technology is that the brain can just learn to control like a robotic arm or a computer screen. And there's nothing in evolution that, should allow for that to happen, but we just learn this thing. And this is the amazing thing about the brain is it's like plastic and brilliant and good at learning things. Yeah, it's just it's a really beautiful it's a beautiful framework of looking at games because they're about like making decisions. And when the Renaissance mathematicians realized that chance was this like knowable thing, suddenly we could like collect data and make better decisions because we would have a better sense of like what the probability of X was. Like suddenly we could say there's 50% chance of rain tomorrow. Like it's crazy that seems such a prosaic thing today, but at the time it was mind blowing. Like and it still kind of is mind blowing that we're able to predict anything about the future. So it gives us more leverage over the future, having that kind of mathematics. And this was all thanks again to like looking at games and like thinking about how we make decisions in uncertain situations.
That is so cool. And it also makes me think about what I like about games, or one thing that I like about them is there's a phrase, I don't remember where it comes from, probably a very brilliant game designer said it, but games are a series of interesting decisions. That a fun game gives you a series of interesting decisions to make. And I've been thinking about that a lot when I'm playing a game that I get bored by. It's when there's no decisions to make and it just sort of feels like it's on rails and there's no challenge. There's no options. I'm just sort of going through the motions. Whereas a game that makes me make choice after choice after choice after choice, and each choice is interesting and has an outcome, I tend to find kind of addictive. And what's interesting about that is that I have a really hard time making decisions in real life. This is actually this is like my girlfriend tells me. She's like, you really have a lot of trouble making decisions. You just need to choose something and stop asking me what the best decision is, But I will feel tortured sometimes by like, what do I wear to go out tonight, or whatever it is. And so the experience in a game of making a decision, making decisions rapidly that do matter, except they don't matter because it's within a game, I think is powerful and addictive to me. And that actually brings me to my next question, because we've been talking about all these ways that games are important because of how they affect the real world, that we learn something scientific from them, or they affected human history, they affected thermonuclear war, or we can learn something that we can put into practice in our daily lives. They're functional in some way, right? And all those things are wonderful. And I often use those to describe why games are good when I'm trying to convince people. At the same time, to me, they somehow feel like they're missing the point, because isn't the point of a game that it doesn't matter? Like the fun thing or the enjoyable thing or the reason you want to engage in a game at all is that it is a space that where the outcome does not matter. Even when you look at, puppies playing, they are fighting, but the outcome, one's on their back and one's on top. Neither of them actually cares which one's winning or losing. In the context of a game, you might get mad and competitive, but you know that if you're mad at your friend because they beat you at a game an hour after the game's over, that you've made a mistake. And when we're mad at a sports, my team's losing. Well, it's fun to be angry or to be invested in the outcome of an event that doesn't actually affect your life, because it doesn't, you're still going to be able to pay rent tomorrow or not pay rent tomorrow, no matter how well the Lakers do at the game. And so to me, that seems to be an essential thing about games, that they don't matter. And yet when we are trying to talk about why games are important, we keep talking about ways in which they do matter. And so I guess my question is there an importance in the not mattering that we can talk about?
Yeah, that's I really like the way you put that. I think that's a really good insight. And I think it's absolutely something people miss a lot when they kind of extol the virtues of games, because games ultimately are just like at best models of the world or simulations, or they're never like perfect. And as an example, back to Kriegsspiel in World War I, the Germans were using Kriegsspiel to plan an invasion, and they decided they were going to like go through Belgium to do this thing. And they planned it out perfectly, and it worked really well. And it worked exactly like they expected, except they didn't plan for the diplomatic fallout of going through Belgium and invading a neutral country. So games like only can kind of contain what their rules include.
Right.
And so and then also their rules can be sort of didactic in a sense. So another example of this is like SimCity, which Will Wright made in the 90s. And he was like designing another game and realized that designing video game levels was super fun and other people should be able to do it. So he made this game where people could design a city, and he based it on these real equations of an urban designer, Jay Forrester. But the problem is Jay Forrester was this like raging libertarian, and all of his equations were kind of like ultimately trying to show that like any kind of regulation in a city is like a bad idea. And so it turns out like if you play SimCity a lot, you can get like a giant city that works and like is very kind of steady state and easy to take care of if you just have like nothing but like population and a huge police force, no like public services, nothing else. So, games can feel like this really objective way of looking at the world, but they always have some kind of, they're based on some assumption, they're based on some dynamic, they're artificial. And even so, even the probability theory, for example, the like randomness of dice is not the same kind of randomness of events in the real world.
Right.
And this is actually a huge problem because like when scientists model their experimental results using the same statistics as the ones of dice, for example, they get all kinds of weird results. And this is probably underlying like the replication crisis in science. And the same is true of like the 2009 financial crisis. Is one thought of where that came from was a lot of people were using this Black-Scholes model, which was like an estimate of risk, but they're estimating risk at this rate that was like similar to that of dice, rather than the risk of the real world, which has like much more likely to have like big outlier events. And then this misestimation of risk ended up like collapsing the stock market or the housing market or whatever. So
wow.
Yeah. So I think, it seems in some ways it seems like games are this really powerful model of the world, but there's a lot of ways in which they fall short as well.
Yeah. But that does that make them less valuable, or does it mean it's a misapplication,
Yeah, I think they're valuable. I think they're good simulations, but we should always just remember that that's all they really are, is like simulations.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think part of this was inspired, or part of my like rant comes out of like, I worked at DeepMind, the AI company, and Demis Hassabis, the CEO, was always talking about like maybe we can replace politicians because we'll have like a model of society. I think kind of thinking along the Sims line, and it's a very like technocratic way of thinking about things, and it always struck me as very naive. And
yeah, and you could replace me with an AI. What am I even doing? I mean, it's bizarre that a lot of people think this.
Yeah, a lot of people do, and
it's such a misunderstanding of humanity to think that there's always a desire to like eliminate politics and eliminate the necessity for group decision making, when in fact group decision making is all that humans do. I mean, like, what are you supposed to, you're literally going to eliminate the ability of people to have a say in their society or to have an uprising? Like all you can do is ignore politics. You can't get rid of it or outsource it. It just exists,
Yeah. And that's kind of like what's scary about things like game theory, when it's like trying to model humans with a model that doesn't actually model humans well at all. And trying to kind of predict what we're going to do with it. So kind of replacing democratic choice with the like assumptions of a mathematical model. And that seems really problematic on a lot of levels for a lot of reasons.
It's very foundation, Isaac Asimov, Harry Seldon's, equations to predict humanity, which, everybody loved that book when you were 13 years old and you check it out of the library and it's like, oh, what a cool idea. But like, again, it's science fiction, motherfuckers. Like, it's fiction for a reason. It's a fun idea. You're not supposed to actually do it. It doesn't mean it would actually work,
Right.
it is game logic present in these AI companies, since you've been there firsthand and seen it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, AI was in part inspired by games. So like Ada Lovelace, working on the difference engine, the like first computer, wanted to train it to play games because that would help them raise money. They never had money. So they thought this would be like a cool little publicity stunt. And that has basically been true for like every computer company since then. Like IBM had a computer play checkers and then chess. Then, DeepMind taught computers to play Atari and Go and StarCraft, and made a lot of money doing that, and also spent a lot of money doing that. Like it costs a huge amount of money to train computers to play these games. But the kind of like ultimate goal was to train computers to build games, because it seems like to play games you need intelligence. So the hope was like Claude Shannon, the father of information theory, and like Alan Turing, the father of computing, both came up with this in the like 1940s. Like, what if we just taught computers to play games, and then we could call them intelligent? And we have, since taught computers to play games, and it made them able to play games. It did not make them intelligent. So, and you can also look at like a really high level chess player. They're super smart and they're super good at chess. Doesn't mean they're smart at other things. So the kind of intelligence trained in a game does not necessarily generalize. That's some kind of other very mystical thing that was like AI companies have really not figured out yet. So yeah, I think a lot of people are still thinking of games as like, this is the realm that we're going to get intelligences. And now that we've kind of run out of board games and video games to train computers on, their goal is kind of to like gamify aspects of reality, because they now have the algorithms that can like play whatever game. So if they can like turn some aspect of reality into a game, they can make progress in the real world. So this works in some cases like science, where they've kind of gamified certain physics questions like protein folding. Like, how can we predict how a protein will fold so that we can target drugs to whatever protein we're looking at? That's something DeepMind did. It's really cool. But then we also have things like where they're gamifying language. So that's what like language models are doing, basically, where they're kind of trained to like take a giant corpus of data, take certain words out, guess what words are missing in that like training data. And then by guessing missing words, they kind of build up this like this interdependent network of understanding of language. So they kind of can like play at language, but they can't really, there isn't like an understanding there. And that's why they're kind of bullshit machines, really.
That is such a fascinating connection between computer models or artificial intelligences designed to play chess or Go or that sort of thing with large language models, that it's sort of a similar thing that they're trying to do. I think it's particularly fascinating to me because as you were talking, I was thinking about how, the project of creating a computer that can beat a human at chess is a little bit besides the point. Like, it is cool, right? But humans don't actually play chess in order to win chess. Like, the goal of chess is not to beat chess, beat the other person, be the best. An individual player can choose that as a goal. But why do humans play chess? For fun.
Yeah.
Like as artistic expression, as a way of learning, new ways of thinking, as there's all these other reasons. Humans aren't going to stop playing chess because the computer is better at it. It's like, oh, okay, well, we could use the computer to help teach us to be better at chess, blah, blah, blah. More people are playing chess than ever. The sport is like undergoing a boom right now. You could say the same thing of Go, et cetera. And so that actually makes me really understand why large language models are bullshit, because they can produce large amounts of text that like even a lot of humans can't produce. Well, who gives a shit? The point isn't just like producing text. That's not the point of writing or reading. The point of writing or reading is for pleasure, for communication, for all of these other things that we use it for, because it's a human activity. It's not a computer activity. And so there's a category error happening here on a deep level that this is making clear to me. Thank you.
Yeah, no, And the AI researcher, John McCarthy, got really depressed at some point because all these researchers had gotten so obsessed with like just having their computers win games without really like caring whether it was telling us anything about intelligence. And he likened it to like, it's as if geneticists took fruit flies and like raced the fruit flies rather than using them to like study genes.
That is such an incredible comparison. Yeah, because who cares about, the point wasn't to make a great fruit fly. The point wasn't to make something great at chess. It was to learn something more broadly. I think the question should not be, can you make a computer that's great at chess? It's, can you build a computer that plays chess for fun?
Yeah.
Right?
Or
that would be intelligence.
Yeah. Or a computer that could invent a game like chess.
Right. Right. Because that is what humans really did, was we don't just play it, we created the game.
Yeah.
That is so fucking cool. I love getting to a real galaxy brain moment like that on a podcast like this. Are there any, dangers to games themselves? We've talked about game logic being misapplied to the real world. So let's set that aside because that's one. I also think about, sometimes when I play a video game, I'm like, what a wonderful tonic for depression this can be, right? Because what a lot of video games do is, in real life, it's hard to complete a task. Tasks are vague. It's hard to do them. You don't really get a reward. And in a video game, a lot of video games say, hey, here's 10 things I want you to do. You can check them off real quick, right? And it can give people, especially people who are depressed, right? And that's a real problem. It can give them a sense of accomplishment that I think could be valuable. And I've actually experienced this myself. There are moments when I've played the Dark Souls series of games where I literally transcended myself because I did something that I thought was impossible. There's a clip that is still in my Twitch stream of me playing Sekiro and fighting this boss over and over again and being like, I cannot do this. I'm so mad. Oh, I'm so mad. And then I was like, my final run. And then on my final run, I beat the boss perfectly. I blocked every attack. Parry, 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 hit. I did it perfectly. And I was like, I can't believe I did that. I did something. Wow. I experienced self-transcendence. And that was such a powerful experience for me of learning on a deep level that then produced a result that I didn't even know I was capable of. And that was something that, I could apply to other parts of my life in the same way that the first time I ran a marathon, it taught me something about my own endurance that I didn't know. And so I was able to take that experience with me. That's the good version. The bad version is sometimes people just, that's the only kind of accomplishment that they pursue, and they maybe get stuck in that rut. I've seen that happen to folks as well. And so I'm just curious if you have any dangers about games, because more people are playing more games than ever on a wider scale, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good one. And I've had the same experience of like playing way too much Animal Crossing or something when I was super depressed. Not proud of it, but it got me through some tough times. But I think, there's some obvious ones as well, like certain games are addicting, and game designers are increasingly putting these kind of like insidious, addictive elements to get people to pay more money or spend more time or spend more attention on their game. And then I think the other one is kind of philosophical, which is like games can kind of play us. So when you play Monopoly, you have to like win it, you have to act like a cutthroat capitalist and like stab your siblings in the back to win, even if you're like a total hippie, lovey-dovey person at heart. So when we play games, we have to kind of like mold our values to the games we're playing. And part of the danger here is that like there's a lot of games and game design in our everyday technological experiences, like in dating apps, in social media, on shopping sites, where, we're kind of being played by these game dynamics. And so looking at ways in which we're being encouraged to like abandon our own values to like win at a certain game, whether that's social media or like, if we are working at like a gamified platform, like working for Uber, like gigging for Uber or something.
Right. And I've experienced that on apps. I look at my Uber driver's like screen whenever I'm in one, and I see how gamified it is. Or I think about, Twitch, I mentioned earlier, has a completely gamified back end to try to convince people to stream more. And even though they're not being paid, if you get all the achievements, then maybe one day you'll make a little bit of money at this. Like that's a really nefarious trend.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean,
or Amazon does this as well in
Yes.
in their warehouses, right?
That's right.
That's a really clear example.
Right. And they work people too hard. And, it's ultimately like gamification is basically you're getting aligned. If it's like through a work, like an employer, you're being aligned with your employer's values, not necessarily your values. So you really have to think about like, how am I getting nudged here?
Yeah. And I mean, it's important to look at the game systems in our everyday lives. I also think another good one is freaking Flyer Miles is a real game system that encourages you to try to game it. And I travel a lot because I'm a stand-up comic. And so I unfortunately almost have to play the game because it's just, that's the, I don't know. It's when you fly as much as I do, you're sort of dumb if you don't do it. But then you find yourself, it's designed in such a way that is meant to get you to put more money on your credit card, to pay a little bit more money because then I'll get the points on my main airline and all that sort of thing. And I feel myself being the victim of the system. Yeah.
They're really good. They got a lot of good psychologists on this. And all you can do is be aware, I guess.
Are there, now that we are learning more about games, right, that more people are taking games more seriously, game design is a bigger field, or game studies is a bigger field at universities across America. Is there a frontier in what we know or what we are creating about games that you're excited about in the future?
I think, I mean, game design and kind of mechanism design is where I'm most excited about, where the board game designer Reiner Knizia talks about when he designs a game, the first thing he does is design the scoring system because that's how you get the behavior you want. And of course, the players will play the game you want them to play if you kind of have the scoring system in the right setup the way it should be. And of course, there's like dangers to that, like we just discussed, where we can get manipulated by that. But there's also really kind of amazing ways you can incentivize great behaviors through, for example, like mechanism design is also known as reverse game theory. And these game theorists have designed like kidney exchange markets so that people who need kidneys but like don't have a match can like find a match. So there's a lot of really cool ways of like, we can't use a traditional market where like we would use money to like incentivize exchange, but we're going to find these other ways of incentivizing a certain behavior.
That is so cool. I mean, I hope as it develops, you come back sometime to tell us more about it. Are there any, I don't know, any final thoughts that you have to share with folks about like how they might think differently about games they encounter in the world as a result of, these insights? Or has it changed the way that you see games in your life?
Well, I think one thing is it really made me look at like, what are the games I'm playing? For example, like, if you're working at a corporate job, how does promotion work? And how do the behaviors of the employees at your place like result from that system? And how do you think you're going to get promoted versus how does the system actually work? Like sometimes we think like the world should work a certain way and we try to, work in the way we think the world should work and it really works this other way. And it ultimately your life will be easier if you play the game as it is, which is kind of unfortunate. But, if you're looking for ways to make your life easier, that's one way of just like, what are the games I'm kind of moving in and how do I play them in the least effortful manner to get the results I want? So I think,
if you look at your life as a game to be played.
Yeah. And then I think also kind of thinking about that can also kind of inspire sort of like systems level thinking of like, even if you, create your own games, like build your own little games, pen and paper, even just to kind of like get a systems level thinking of like, how can I incentivize a particular behavior in players, or how can I get people to work a certain way? It can be kind of interesting thought experiment for like, games are ultimately manipulators.
That is so cool. And this entire conversation has been so fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on the show to share it with us. The name of the book is Playing with Reality, How Games Have Shaped Our World. Of course, you can get a copy at our special bookshop if you're listening at factuallypod.com/books. Where else can people find it and where can they find your work, Kelly?
I'm on Twitter, Kelly B. Clancy, or my website's kellybclancy.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It's been awesome.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you once again to Kelly for coming on the show. If you want to pick up a copy of her book, you can head to factuallypod.com/books And just a reminder, when you buy there, you'll be supporting not just this show, but your local bookstore as well. But if you want to support the show directly, of course, you can do so on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/Adam Conover. $5 a month gets you every episode of the show ad-free. For $15 a month, I will read your name at the end of this podcast and put it in the credits of every one of my video monologues. This week, I want to thank Eden Welch, Patrick Flanagan, Cratone, Lynn Zlatt, Andrew M. Purifoy, and Marcus Mitchell. Thank you so much for your support. Patreon.com/Adam Conover if you want to join them. And I thank you so much for supporting. I also want to thank my producers, Sam Roudman and Tony Wilson, everybody here at HeadGum for making the show possible. You can find my tickets and tour dates at adamconover.net. Just a reminder, I'm headed to Phoenix, Toronto, Canada. This is going to be in early 2025, but we're booking far ahead, so I have time to find my passport. And until then, we'll see you next time on Factually. Thank you so much for listening.
That was a HeadGum podcast.